Welcome back to Mid-Maryland Votes, where we bring you the voices and the choices shaping our communities. Today we're sitting down with Adam Greivell, candidate for Washington County State's Attorney. This office is one of the most powerful in local government, deciding how crimes are prosecuted and how justice is served. Adam's campaign message is clear: enough is enough. We'll ask him what that means, how he plans to tackle crime in Hagerstown and Washington County, and what difference voters would see if he takes the job. And let's get into it. Welcome to Mid-Maryland Votes. I am your host, Mark Flynn. With me is my co-host,
Ethan Lowen.
And we have a very special guest tonight. We have Adam Greivell from Washington County, Maryland. Thank you, Adam, for joining us today.
You bet. Hey, guys.
Hey, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, my name's Adam Greivell. I am born and raised in Washington County, Maryland, a Hagerstown guy, except for the little bit of time I went away to go to law school. Well, I'm an attorney in Washington County, Maryland. I've been born and raised here. Grew up in Hagerstown. I never considered myself a guy for politics. Got involved in politics after put in 3 times to be appointed as a judge. And if you don't know, judges in Maryland, circuit court judges in particular, are actually elected positions, but we kind of we allow everybody to be gaslit by this fairy tale that actually the process is the governor appoints a judge, and then if somebody wants to challenge who was appointed, they might decide to run against that judge. But that's not really the truth. The truth is that when there's a vacancy, the governor has a temporary power to appoint a judge. And that judge can only serve until the next election. And the seat is open for whoever decides to run for it. And I decided to do that in 2022. And like I said, never wanted to be really political or in politics, but it was my life's dream to be a judge. And I decided I was going to run for it with everything I had. It's very hard to overtake an incumbent judge, and came within 326 votes of doing that, which is, as I understand, the closest that has occurred in Washington County for about 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's impressive.
Yeah.
You're running now for state's attorney, right, for Washington County?
I am.
The Washington County State's Attorney Office would be doing, what are their job titles and so forth?
Sure. Well, the state's attorney for each county is the top prosecutor that represents the state of Maryland in all criminal cases. There's a few other minor functions that a state's attorney does, but the state's attorney is the elected person, is sort of the top, you could say, law enforcement official who's in charge of prosecuting cases, and they have a staff underneath of them, other attorneys and other individuals that help the mission, so to speak. But they conduct investigations, lead grand juries, and prosecute the criminals. And so each county has a state's attorney at the head of the county.
And as far as being the state's attorney, that involves running a staff and, of course, experience in law. Do you have experience with dealing with a staff, and how long have you been involved in the field of law?
Sure. Well, I've been a lawyer since 2005, and I've run my own law firm since 2010. So 15 years. I'd say about 13 of those years I've had staff. Certainly nothing the size of the state's attorney's office. And I will say this theme over and over again, that if you want somebody who's got experience running a larger staff, vote for the other person. If you want someone who has the commitment to do the job the way I'm going to tell you I will do it, you can vote for me. I'm just offering myself. I'm telling you how I will do it. I'm telling you what I will stand for. And if you want it, vote for it. If you don't. It won't. It's not my life's mission to be state's attorney. It's my goal to make sure that somebody does the job the way it's supposed to be done.
I know part of your campaign slogan is "Enough is enough," which is a very cool saying, in my opinion, especially since when you look at Washington County as a whole, and Hagerstown in particular, there is a serious problem with crime. So when you say that phrase, how are you going to adopt that if you are elected into changing the culture that we now have in Hagerstown, especially, but in Washington County in general, regards vis-a-vis the crime situation we're seeing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I haven't focused my career on defense or criminal work. I have always done criminal defense work, and it's in part because I was a criminal justice major in college. And going through that education, it's very clear. It's a bedrock principle that our criminal justice system serves a few different purposes and has a few different sort of mechanisms for achieving the mission. And one of them is deterrence. You need to deter people from being tempted to commit crime. And one of the ways you do that is you send a message. You punish people who act badly, right? And so you protect the community by getting the bad actors off the streets so they can no longer reoffend and hurt people. And that's a direct, impact of the criminal justice system. And then you send a message that, hey, if you are tempted to engage in this behavior, that's going to happen to you too, right? So you tell people that crime doesn't pay, but the message in Washington County is that crime pays. I don't know your personal financial lives, but I imagine at some point in time you borrowed money to buy a house. What a chump! What a chump! I feel like a chump. I borrowed money. I'm going to pay back interest over 20 or 30 years. I'm going to pay back more than I borrowed. But if you just go to a youth sporting organization and steal $250,000 from them, you'll eventually get arrested or charged, and then you can make a plea deal in this county where you can pay back half of that money over a 5 or 6 year period, and you'll never spend a day in jail. And this person's stealing money, and they only have to pay back half of it, and they never go to jail. Pretty good deal. And it's not an isolated incident. It's happened several times.
And obviously, you bring up a broader point, I think, that a lot of people, the majority of people, actually see and struggle with, which is that, in Maryland, there have been a number of laws that have been passed that essentially, like you said, have made it so that crime does pay, simply because the deterrence you had mentioned isn't there to the extent that it has traditionally been in our state and continues to be in surrounding states. So that is certainly an issue. I assume where there's an inability to prosecute some crimes because of laws passed at the state level in Annapolis.
Well,
At the same time,
that may be. I'll let you ask your question, but
okay, well, I mean,
we can enforce the laws that we have, and we're not doing that.
and I think that's where I was headed with the question, because at the same time, I guess what you're inferring is that there's an ability that the state attorney has to enforce the laws. And is it your assertion that the current state's attorney is not enforcing the laws to the amount available? And if so, why not?
Yeah. Yes, that is my assertion. And I do want to say this. I really like Gina Cerencian a lot. She's a very good attorney. I supported her being moved into that position when the former state's attorney left. And it's my belief that she has a heart and a brain, and she knows how to use them both. And so, as a participant in the criminal justice system, as a defense attorney, she's great to work with. You have a client who has a very unique or interesting situation, and she will hear you out, and she will do something that you can almost count on her doing something compassionate, and that's good in a lot of respects. But when every case is special, everybody gets the message that they're going to take it easy on me too. And sometimes you have to um, you have to rise above the immediate case. You have to look at, and I talked to Gina about this after I announced my candidacy. And I told her, I said, you may be doing a phenomenal job in every single case. You may be achieving the best result you can achieve in every case. But part of the mission of the state's attorney is also messaging. It's also making sure the community knows that this conduct won't be tolerated. Judge Wright a couple weeks ago announced, a 30-year sentence for that gentleman who shot at deputies 23 times in Washington County, and the state's attorney's office was trying to they had agreed with the defense that they ought to seek a sentence of 6 to 12 years, and the gentleman had already served about 3 years pre-trial, and so he may have gotten time served. And Judge Wright said something really basic, which is that that's not going to be tolerated in our county. She needed to send a message. So even though the defense and the prosecution sought a much smaller sentence, the judge did the right thing anyway. You can't have compassion in every case at the expense of everybody else. I'm a softie at home, and this is something I've had to come to realize as a father. My wife has done a good job teaching me this lesson, that you can't baby your kids. You can't make everything easy for your kids, because all you do is you turn them into entitled brats. And if we do that across the board in every case, we always find some reason to be compassionate. It's great for defense attorneys, but it's not good for the community.
Yeah, community. I mean, the state's attorney is not only a community leader in the courtroom, but also a voice for the community. And that community has to say that enough is enough, like you said. People in Washington County are definitely concerned about repeat offenders. We're seeing the same core 8 or 10% of repeat offenders, especially with violent crime in Washington County. What would be your moving forward in this position if you were elected? How would you deal with those kind of people and balance that against rehabilitation?
Right. Well, every person not deserves, but we ought to give people the opportunity to be rehabilitated. I'm a person who was rehabilitated at a young age, and I certainly believe in redemption. But violent criminals are violent criminals, and I'm sorry if you had a drug problem or some other circumstances going on, but when you shoot people or stab them in the face or hire people to murder people, that's going to be punished. You might have to wait 20 or 30 years before your chance at redemption or a second chance to re-enter society. We don't have to continually victimize ourselves by letting known bad actors back on the street. That's a clear, direct objective, and our law enforcement works so hard to get these people off the street, and then we go and let them back on. You can only do your role. The police can lock them up and can investigate and gather the evidence and help build the case, and the prosecutor can prosecute, and the judge will sentence. And if the prosecutor prosecutes and the judge goes easy on them, fine. And as a state's attorney, I'll let it be known that I did my job and the judge let him off. Okay, that's fine. Chucky Johnson is running a campaign on making sure that there's transparency and accountability in his run for sheriff, and I very much support that mindset. That, hey, if the prosecutor biffs the case, make the prosecutor make the public aware that the prosecutor is the one who biffed the case. If the judge is the one who biffed the case, make the public aware the judge is the one who biffed the case. There's very little accountability for judges. That's fine, but at least people will know where the responsibility lies.
You mentioned Chucky Johnson. We have done a podcast with Chucky. He's running for Washington County Sheriff. Being the state's attorney, it's really important you have good relationships with all of the local law enforcement agencies. How would you categorize those relationships for you right now, and what would you do to improve them in the future?
My relationships with law enforcement are fantastic. I'm very good with Brian Albert. I support him. He's a good sheriff. He's a good man who ran for sheriff. I also am a big fan of Chucky Johnson. And he's the husband of my longtime law partner, Erica Johnson. And I think it's great that we have two really solid individuals running for sheriff. And you will see me support Chucky Johnson because I believe in him. And that doesn't mean I don't like Brian Albert. And I honestly, I view myself and Gina Strinzione the same way. I'm not opposed to her. I think I think the job needs to be done a little more toughly. You can coin that word.
Toughly, I like that.
Toughly. I'm sorry. I work with law enforcement a lot. I've represented a number of sheriff's deputies and other correction officers in disciplinary matters internally. I've represented them. Sometimes when they get in trouble, sometimes I sue the police. But we always have a good relationship. And I've had great experiences dealing with law enforcement. Not universally great. There's always some trouble in any organization. But, I work with the county. I work with the city police, the state police, the sheriff's department. And often we oppose each other, but that we allow our professionalism to rise above.
And what you're describing has quite a bit of implications for the greater community, where if it is correct that the current state's attorney is basically being soft on crime, when in a place particularly like Hagerstown, where we have per capita crime rates that are in many cases equivalent to Baltimore, which is not just the worst in the state, but one of the top 5 worst in the country. And just last year, citizens by the dozens have been coming to public forums talking about the suffering that the continued crime causes. If the state's attorney is indeed allowing that through being compassionate in every case. Are you familiar with that case that occurred where a lady was convicted of basically starving her child to death? And she was allowed out on bond. Is fled. She was convicted of sentenced to 100 years, but she was not there because she's already fled the area. She's a fugitive from the law. Is that the sort of thing that comes about as a result of what you're referring to, or is this more in the realm of how judges operate?
It's a judicial decision. Judge Michael was a warrior of a prosecutor. And he's the judge who made that particular decision. And I understand it was over the objection of the state's attorney. I only think I know things because I've read them just like you have. I don't have any inside knowledge or anything of this situation. But I understand that, this woman was on bond pre-trial and skipped town, and it took a lot of time and resources to get her back here to put her on trial. And she was, it seemed from what I read to be a very unusual circumstance that unfolded, on the last day of trial. And, the judge, I wasn't there in the courtroom. I can't judge what he said. It's easy to look at it and say, hey, that was
right.
A really dumb decision, especially, in hindsight, we all kind of predicted what happened is that she didn't show up, but I wasn't there. I didn't see everything the judge saw. But at my understanding that's not something the state's attorney was looking to have happen.
And as you said, this is a judge who has a reputation as a prosecutor of being a fantastic prosecutor. And so no one, of course, can just judge a person's career or their intentions based on one moment, especially when they have an entire career backing it up in another way. Another thing with you in particular is that I would actually say that you probably understate yourself in a few ways. And one of them is that you actually have a history of being involved with the community, of taking your expertise and lending them to issues that are close to your heart. I know I'm aware of a group of parents that, as they've dealt with the school board, you've helped them out. And also you went to the state Supreme Court and won a case there on behalf of the community of Washington County. But do you want to talk a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess a couple things. I was never going to be a politician. It never was in my mind. I ran for judge because I believed that, in a way, I kind of believed that the community needed me or something, and that I was going to be the one guy that did it the right way or something, right? And I put in for the application process a few times, for the appointment process, and I saw that the opportunities had pretty well dried up, and the only way I was going to become a judge is if I won an election. So I ran. Was not a political animal, and after I lost the primary in 2022, I gave up. I was like, I'm done. I'm not going to pursue being a judge anymore. And I was pretty much out of politics. I didn't have any desire to be in politics. But Neil Parrott had asked if I would help him, with his general election for Congress. And I did everything I could to help with his campaign throughout the rest of that election cycle. And then there was a vacancy on the Washington County Republican Central Committee, and I had no particular interest in joining that, but I was asked to, put myself in for consideration. And, it was kind of like the you've seen the Shawshank Redemption, the last parole, interview. That was me interviewing for the Central Committee. It's like, I don't care. I don't want to be here. I don't, if I can help, I'll help. Right. If you think that having me here will be helpful in some way, I'll do it. But bring me on for what I am, not for what I'm not. If you want someone who's going to beat on a bunch of doors or make cold calls for donations, pick somebody else. Okay. I'm no good at that stuff. Okay, if you want me for what I do bring to the table, then pick me, and I'll do everything I can to help. A year later, they made me the chair because, no one else wanted to do it, so I was the chair of the Central Committee for a year. And through that process, it became more and more in tune with things that are happening politically, and including at the Board of Elections. And I was following closely the selection of the early voting centers, and our local board had made selections, and the state board violated the law in at least 9 different ways that I observed when they declined to approve the local board selections. And it seemed to me like there was a bit of a coup that everyone, the powers that be in Annapolis would have preferred them to have chosen the city library as an early voting site. And so, I jumped into action. It was a lot to bite off, an unprecedented order from the Supreme Court. Where the afternoon that we argued the case, they issued an order that said, you all go to mediation. And they appointed a former Maryland Supreme Court judge to mediate the case for us. And he told us that he was a Supreme Court judge for 10 years, and he'd never seen a case ordered to mediation by the Supreme Court. So we ended up working something out that it wasn't, a total victory, but it was a mediated result that turned out pretty good for the county. So, as far as the school board stuff, a group of parents, come to me over this dirty books in schools, at school library situation. And, it really upset me to see the school board's chief legal counsel get up and sort of pretend to address the community with the legalities that tie their hands in this regard. And she talked about the Supreme Court's decision in the Pico case. And she talked about it as if the Supreme Court has tied the school board's hands and saying that they can't remove materials from school libraries without violating the First Amendment. And that was really upsetting to me. And it helped fuel the way that I was, that I would ultimately address the issue with the board, which was to just lay out that the Supreme Court didn't tie your hands. The Supreme Court gave you a roadmap for how to address inappropriate materials that find their way into school libraries in a way that's consistent with the First Amendment. And so, I did undertake, to sort of box around with the school board a little bit on that, and got some pretty disappointing lack of response. And sometime later discovered that they didn't have any policy at all for parents to challenge school books that have made their way into libraries. And they called this to their attention, and they adopted a policy that is the school board had nothing to do with adopting it, and it's the most draconian, terrible, one-sided policy that you can think of, that is designed to make it impossible for a person with a problem to have it addressed.
What I witnessed occurring behind the scenes was that your efforts and you stepping up and volunteering to help with these matters and to educate these parents is that it created a group of parents that were not only more knowledgeable, but were more committed and understood what was going on with our public schools. And it actually got to the point where some of those parents just started reading the books themselves. So even though you yourself may not have been able to make legal progress with the school board, the parents whom you were working with just started publicly reading the books at school board meetings. And the next election told a very strong story about what the community believes is appropriate, not appropriate for children. So that type of heart, I guess, is what is needed in every part of public service, I believe. And certainly, there's many great candidates, and like you said, your opponent who you're running against also has many fine qualities. But the amount of heart that you have is something that I think that is something everyone should take into consideration. And I'm glad you've thrown your hat back in the ring. I think that the more competition we have in public office, the better off we all are.
Your efforts were definitely not in vain. They did a great job of highlighting some of the things. And to Ethan's point, a lot of people read those books who normally would not if you hadn't stepped in, used your skill set to help the parents. So we thank you for that effort.
The key thing that really, that exercise that I engaged in helped to focus the narrative here. And, I've read about it on my website, and I put it in some of my letters. That what the Supreme Court clarified or confirmed in that Pico case was that the school board is the sort of the way that the community implements its values into the next generation. That's the school board's job, and one of the, I've heard some school board members say, well, we've made it so that the children can opt out, or the parents can say we don't want our kids to have access to that material. Well, guess what? All these kids have phones, and it's not strictly about, we don't want these children to have access to that information. The issue is that the content of the school library sends a message to the community that we, the elected school board, believe this is what's good for you. Okay? It's the mere presence of the material in the school libraries that that sends the message that this is what we're about. This is what we condone, approve, we believe brings value. And I challenged the board that the people will see this, and the election is coming up, and the people will make a decision about what kind of values they want in the school system. And the people spoke very clearly, unprecedented, or all four of the candidates that we supported to take the seats, and overcame every single teachers association, teachers union, Apple ballot candidate. But that message did kind of grow out of those efforts, working with the parents and the courageous parents reading out loud in the school board meetings and bringing attention to the issue. And when we put up a billboard that says no porn in school libraries, everybody knew what we were talking about.
Yeah, no, it was a great result. And I know Washington County is well on their way to, reinstating those family values in our school, as you said, and in our libraries. You're a hero of Ethan because he's been representing the school boards all over the state, like Don Quixote attacking the windmills. And any help that he gets is going to be really greatly appreciated. And I know that he definitely has talked about you in the past and all the efforts you put in. So thank you very much for that effort. Last question I wanted to ask you. I know you still was getting back to the state's attorney thing.
Sure.
If you are elected, what is one of the signs that we're going to see? One of the first visible changes that people will see in Washington County under your leadership as the state's attorney?
Prosecutions are going to go up. Plea deals are going to go down. One thing, when I ran against Joe Michael for circuit court judge, he had a statement in the paper that he pleaded out about 95% of the cases that came before him. Gina Cerencione was in the paper when she was appointed state's attorney, that she pleaded out about 85% of the cases that came before them. I recognize and acknowledge the caseload problem, but you have to look at it. This is not let's make a deal with public safety. Okay, when you plead out, you effectively allow people to get away with the most serious crime that they committed. Either that, or your law enforcement mechanism is designed to overcharge people, which is bad for everybody too. So you don't overcharge for something you don't think happened or you don't think you can prove in order to get a plea to the next worst charge. If you believe they committed this crime, you charge them with that crime. It won't be too hard, and it won't take people too long to realize, there's a different regime. And a simple example of that is in Washington County, it's always been, if you get caught driving with a suspended driver's license, if you clear it up by the time you go to trial and get your license reinstated, they'll dismiss the case. Okay. I go to Frederick County twice. Same type of situation. I go to the prosecutor. Hey, my client's got his license back, and they look at me and go, "So it was still suspended when he was driving." Oh, well, you're not going to dismiss the case? No. Well, he could. So what? He could plead guilty to driving on a suspended license. Well, it didn't take too many examples to know that they just don't mess around with that over there. Okay. Same thing's going to happen here. Defense attorneys are going to know that. we're not going to be able to get PBJ on this. We're not going to be able to get a stat on this. We're not going to be able to plead guilty to the third worst crime and get probation and everything else goes away. You know, no, we're not going to let you. We're not going to drop the most serious charge and let you plead and and we'll recommend to the judge that you get 12 years for shooting at deputies 23 times. It's not going to happen. Okay. What's going to happen is you're going to say you can plead guilty to the most serious charge and you can, accept an appropriate sentence. And if you don't, we'll have a trial. Okay. And the problem is the tail has been wagging the dog. The prosecutors have been the ones afraid of taking cases to trial, afraid of losing. I'm not afraid of losing. I lose plenty. It's fine. It's part of the game. And if you take a case to trial and it falls apart because the police didn't do a good job, well, then we talk to the police and we get them to clean up the act and do a better job next time, and we'll all learn to have a better system. The plea deals are going to go down and they're going to be more appropriate and they're going to be stiffer. That's all there is to it.
I personally can attest to the fact that in Berkeley County, specifically Martinsburg, I witnessed the homeless population drop by 2/3 at the same time that the homeless and crime in Hagerstown has exploded to the level that has caused the outrage that has been occurring over the last year. And it's really very obvious what happened. In Martinsburg at that exact time, they brought in a new police chief who was very tough on arresting individuals. The city council got very tough on penalizing landlords who allowed crime to happen on their property, and prosecutions were occurring. As a result, the criminals, the drug dealers in particular, just went to the next easiest place to continue to deal drugs, and that was Hagerstown. And so what that tells me is that, as you said with Frederick, they didn't go to Frederick, they went to Hagerstown. What that tells me is that if an attitude like you're describing that exists in Martinsburg, exists in Frederick, were to be applied to Washington County, we would benefit from the exact same results. Our children, our schools, everything would benefit from the exact same results.
We've trained people to behave this way. We've conditioned them. We've told them, we broadcasted that you will not suffer a consequence until it's your third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh time. Then we've had enough of that. When you do that to your kids, all you teach your kids is that you didn't mean it when you said it. You're a liar. But you taught them that you're a liar, or you taught them that you're insincere. And we tell our community, we have laws. We got law and order. And then when they violate, we don't do anything to them because we don't want to. It's like we don't want to feel bad that we made someone pay the price. And we make everybody else suffer.
That's an excellent point, Adam. And, pain and consequences are how we train people. Pain is a great teacher, and consequences are a great mentor. And unfortunately, our legal society has taken both of those away from some of our criminal elements. And, I would definitely look forward to you bringing those back to Hagerstown and Washington County as a whole. Hey, we thank you very much for being here with us tonight, Adam. You've been a great guest. We really appreciate you very much. On behalf of Mid-Maryland Votes, my name is Mark Flynn. With me is my co-host,
Ethan Lowen.
And with us is our guest, Adam Greivell. Thanks again for being with us, Adam. We'll see you next time on Mid-Maryland Votes.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
That was Adam Greivell, candidate for Washington County State's Attorney, sharing his vision for change under the banner of Enough is Enough. As always, the choice is in the hands of the voters, and conversations like these help us to understand what's at stake. Thanks for listening, and remember, like, follow, and share for more content like this on both Facebook and our YouTube channel.